Hi, this is Phil Gomes, East Bay native, coming at you live from Rio de Janeiro. And we're here to talk about cachaça, the national spirit of Brazil.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. I am here today with the person who taught me the mantra, viral is an outcome, not a strategy. Currently the Chief Communications and Marketing Officer for Block. He was my first supervisor in the digital realm at Edelman, Phil Gomes. Phil, how are you doing?
And all of that, and yet you let me on your show. That's great.
Yeah, it's true.
Indeed. Well, I mean, it's kind of funny too, right? Because it's like, okay, you got two choices: Brazilian booze or heavy metal, and you went for the booze.
I
So,
went for the booze. In
right.
part, so we could talk about our favorite condiment blogger story.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
I do. I do. Yes.
We had a client who was honestly either ketchup or mustard. I don't remember. And we were asked, this was 2008, 2009, 2007, where blogs were niche, but they weren't that niche yet. And we were starting to build lists of mommy bloggers and, playing our part in the unfortunate rise of influencer culture. And somebody asked us if we could come up with the list of, I believe, top 10 ketchup bloggers. And we said it was too niche. And they said, fine, the top 10 list of condiment bloggers.
Well,
I
because there
think,
was,
that's what
yes,
happened. Yeah.
yeah. Well, there was a childhood disease at the time in marketing, right? Where if you remember the website Technorati, right, which attempted
Yes.
to track influence across the so-called blogosphere. And, every time there was another million bloggers tracked by the thing, everybody just kind of, celebrated for, whatever reason. And there was this childhood disease that like, okay, if there are 10 million bloggers on the planet, that some tiny sliver of that 10 million must mean that there are at least 25. For some reason, 25 seemed to be the magic number.
Yeah.
That there were at least 25 bloggers who were absolutely, positively just passionate and would about your client's doodad or item and would crawl on broken glass to write things about your client. And that was in that very early time something that we were consistently sort of batting against. And that
Mm-hmm.
was and that was really only one of the funniest and most dramatic examples, right? Where it's like, and what I remember most about that particular incident was that the level of authority on the other end of that Polycom bat phone, right? Which was,
Mm-hmm.
we need a list of catch-up bloggers. It was very, pound the conference table
Yeah.
authoritative. And then it was, we responded as every good counselor must, right? Which, okay, can we think a little more broadly? Can we think a little more, it's like,
Right.
and again,
People who
with equal
use
amounts of,
ketchup with blogs. Yeah.
and with equal amounts of authority, it was, we need condiment bloggers.
Yeah. It was so wild. It was such a wild time. Because now I probably could find 10 condiment TikTokers,
Right.
right? Like is it possible that our colleagues were just they were
Way
ahead
ahead
of
of
their
their
time.
time.
They were ahead of their time.
Yeah, it's kind of funny the niches that you find even today, and thanks to short form media, you can satisfy those niches without any effort
Yeah.
whatsoever, right? So
Yeah, it would have been better for when Tumblr was in its heyday with like single serving tumblers,
right.
um, or TikTok food trends. But I think about it often.
I have not thought about the condiment vloggers in some time.
Yeah, I have that, and then there was a family owned company that had us build out a list of Chicago bloggers to invite to an event, and then they canceled the event because they were afraid that people might cuss in person at the event.
Chicagoans.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that was our first
Millennials.
mistake.
Millennials who at the time were in their 20s.
Right.
I was like, that they might cuss in their blog posts about the event. No, that they might cuss on premises.
Right.
So we
Well,
can't accept the risk of having this event.
no. Yeah, and I wonder if that would even be true today, right? Yeah, probably. I don't know. People are awfully precious about those kind of things these days still.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. But that was a long time ago.
Yes. We have shared stories and scars, Leah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, every time I see the Bellagio fountain, I think about the Windows Vista launch.
Right. Or Diet Coke and Mentos.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
that's the first thing I think of.
Yeah. No, I think about sending Vista laptops to bloggers and then having the bloggers auction them off.
To pay
I
for
don't
the
know.
taxes. To
Right.
pay for the taxes that
On the gifts.
probably
Yeah.
that they got for the gifts. Yeah, I remember it was one of those situations where obviously if you're going to launch Windows Vista, which required additional hardware and higher performing hardware, um, you're going to send it to a few people that understand how these trials work, how the game works, that sort of thing. And I think the thinking was that, hey, if five Ferrari red Acer laptops sent to influencers were good, 100 must be better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the problem maybe was the scale,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, I do remember, yeah, some people were auctioning them off, and there was concern about the tax burden of getting a Ferrari branded fire engine red Acer
Laptop.
laptop. So
Yeah. Yeah. But now you are far away from the world of condiment blogger lists. You're in
yes, I
Brazil.
am. Yes, I am. So my God. So fast forward to 2018, I left Edelman, of course, where we met. And I joined the cryptocurrency world. So I work at a place called Block, which was started by one of the earliest investors in the cryptocurrency space, Mr. Matthew Rozak, and one of the earliest developers in Bitcoin, Mr. Jeff Garzik. And we are a remote first type organization.
Mm-hmm.
If pressed, we say we're based in Chicago because that's where our chairman is, but we are all over the world. And one of the advantages of that, of course, is that it doesn't matter where we live. And so after about 15, 16 years in Chicago, my wife and I and our two kids, we decamped for Rio. And that's where my wife Leticia is from. And we've been living here now for about 8 months. And we actually live in a building where four generations of my wife's family live. If you include our kids, her mom, and her mom's parents, you got four generations in this building, which is very, very cool. And which I guess brings us to our topic, right?
Because yeah, it does. Because of Leticia, or here is my interpretation, and then you'll fix it.
Okay.
Leticia, your wonderful wife, is Brazilian.
Yep.
So she introduced you to cachaça, which is
Cachaça. Yes.
chacas. What?
Ca-
Chacasa?
Cachaça. Cacha-
Cachaça?
Cachaça.
Cachaça?
Cachaça.
Cachaça.
You got it.
But it's all, there's no S in there, is there?
No, no, you got the
Oh, the
CH,
C with
and
the,
then you've got the C with the little
okay.
thingamabob under it. The cedilla. Yeah.
So she introduces you to this Brazilian liqueur or alcohol.
Yes.
All of this
Yes.
you will fact check.
Right.
And then you started blogging about it in the spirit of a ketchup blogger.
In the spirit, so to speak. Yeah.
The Cachaça Gora.
Yes. So yeah, a little bit of additional color under that. So Leticia and I started dating in 2005. I like to joke that I got a job and a wife in like the same month.
Mm-hmm.
Another bit of color in that is that she doesn't actually drink.
Right.
But her mom and stepdad were president emeritus of the local Cachaça Appreciation Society in Rio. And it's called the Confraria de Copo Furado, which is the Brotherhood of the Pierced Glass. Right? You know, hey, my glass has a hole in it. You know, keep filling
Yeah.
it, kind of thing. And so then around 2006, 2007, I'm waiting, you know, sort of for we're about to go out, and everybody's running around doing their thing, and sometimes this part takes a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down with my laptop, and I'm sitting here going, well, all right, my Portuguese is unforgivably terrible. Because I have a Portuguese surname. My father is from Portugal, and at that time I'm like, oh, I'm about to marry a Brazilian too.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all just kind of sitting around. Everybody's all getting ready, and I cracked open my laptop, and I was like, I'm wondering if there are any English language cachaça blogs out there. And so it turned out there were none. And I'm thinking to myself, well, again, my Portuguese is terrible, but this strikes me as a really interesting way to get in good with the in-laws. So I had are you ready for this? I had a TypePad account.
Oh, it was TypePad, not Blogspot?
Yeah, no, it was TypePad. No,
Oh.
no, no.
Well, because you're
I
like an
had,
open source, you're a techier person than I am.
I paid
Yeah.
like $15 a month, whatever. And for actual tools like an adult, damn it. And I sort of designed it myself, which was kind of funny because Leticia is a designer.
You were also marrying a graphic designer.
And here I am just sort of designing it myself. And I started searching, and of course we had some cachaça around, so I started tasting it. And over the course of a few days, I had a few posts up there. And within, I want to say 72 hours, I gave a bad review to this one terrible cachaça. And within 72 hours, the brand manager of Ipioca Cachaça, a Dutch gentleman, emailed me saying that, hey, I'm a representative of the Tellus family who owns Ipioca, and while we appreciate your opinion, please know that that the product that you reviewed won 3 gold medals at like the Miami Spirits competition.
Mm-hmm.
So subtext, he's politely saying, you know, what the hell do you
You're
know?
wrong.
Yeah.
Thanks for trying. You're wrong. Move on.
But distillers started finding me.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing I know, LeBlanc finds me, which is now wholly owned by Bacardi. And they really supported what I was doing. And then the next thing you know, okay, now we're back in Chicago. We're in this apartment in the Loop, and I'm starting to receive booze. And at a certain point, an area of our living room floor, about the size of the average kitchen table, was basically just cachaça bottles
Mm-hmm.
that people were just sending me, and it was pretty amazing. And as I dug into it, um, I'm just really fascinated by, you know, cachaça as, I mean, it is more a part of the history of Brazil than bourbon is to the history of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really interesting. And then what also drew me in was, I could put five different bottles in front of you. All maybe they're aged in different woods. Maybe one of them isn't aged at all. Maybe one sat rested in a steel container for 5 months, whatever. You would swear that they were all five different spirits,
Mm.
right? And so, just the access to the different flavors of, not only using American oak to age it, but also the Brazilian rainforest woods. I guess this is a good time to actually define what cachaça is,
Yes.
right?
So what
Um,
is cachaça?
well,
Cachaça.
there you go. You got it.
Cachaça. All
Yeah,
right.
right there. Right, lock that in. Um, so it is distilled from fermented sugarcane juice, as opposed to rum, for example, which is distilled from molasses, right? And what's interesting is cachaça actually predates rum by about a century.
Okay.
And the definition of cachaça, legal definition, is that it's made from fresh, squeezed, fermented, distilled sugarcane juice. It is between 38 and 48% alcohol by volume, and it is made in Brazil.
Okay.
There is an extra definition in there in that if the distiller is really awful at their job, they are allowed to add up to 6 grams of sugar per liter of distillate. So there are some that, if they want to cover up a multitude of artisanal sins, they
It's just
can
like Kool-Aid,
add
just
that.
add the sugar.
Just add the sugar, right? And that's
So
usually typical of the industrial producers here versus the artisanal ones.
is when you're using sugarcane to make cachaça,
Uh-huh.
cachaça,
Yep.
um, is it that they've oh my God, I'm going to sound like an idiot. Have they extracted the sugar and then they're using the sugarcane byproduct from a different industrial product to make the cachaça, right? Or is
Nope.
it like solely used for the alcohol
You
to
just
distill?
juice
Okay.
you just juice the cane. You normalize the temperature. You go into a distillation tank. I could get into all of that when I talk about how I apprenticed at a cachaça distillery for
Yes.
2 weeks. We'll get
Yes.
to that in a bit, but um,
Okay, so it's
yeah,
not it's not a byproduct. It is like
no, no,
okay,
no.
great.
Well, I mean, and it's got a really fascinating history too, right? Um, because like I said, it predates rum by a century, and what people started to see, what people started to notice is that, actually the slaves that were working on the plantations, they started to notice what was happening to them when they were drinking sugarcane that was left out for too long.
Mm,
And then the Portuguese colonists, applied European distilling methods. And then it was actually, as these things go, it was outlawed by the Portuguese crown, cachaça was,
mm-hmm.
because it competed with bagaceira, which bagaceira is kind of like Portuguese grappa, right? It's
Okay.
it's distilled from the grape pomace, the skins of the wine,
So
the
it
skins
is a
of the grapes that
byproduct.
the bagaceira is.
Yeah.
Um,
So they couldn't import the Bagaceira to Brazil if Brazil was having its own homegrown
if they
alcohol.
had their own homegrown hooch, yeah.
Okay.
So it was outlawed by the crown because it competed with this product. And as these things go, this did not actually stop the production of cachaça.
Mm-hmm.
So the crown said, "Well, we're going to tax this. We're going to tax it," and that also did not slow down production and didn't do much to raise revenues for the crown. But it did manage to piss off the distillers.
Mm-hmm.
And so the distillers and farmers and any number of conscripted slaves, led by a gentleman named Geronimo Barbalho Bezerra.
It's a great name.
Yeah, isn't it though? You
Yeah.
want to follow that name into
Yeah.
battle, right? Um, he actually led a raid, basically a protest that turned into a raid on the governor's palace. And back then, the capital of Brazil was in Rio. And so they staged this dawn raid, and they demanded an end to this tax, and actually demanded restitution for the taxes paid up to that point. And so they raid this palace at dawn, and the governor was traveling. Actually, I think the governor was back in Portugal at the time. And so he left his uncle in his place, and the uncle was taken prisoner, and the uncle was taken prisoner because the soldiers joined the rebellion, and that might have had something to do with the fact that the soldiers actually hadn't been paid in several months. So they decided to join Geronimo. And then eventually this was put down. The governor returned, and presumably with paid troops.
Right.
And poor Geronimo was beheaded, and they put his head on a stake for public display. And to pacify the situation, the crown actually recalled the governor and legalized the production and sale of cachaça, which we here in Brazil we still celebrate this September 13th. September 13th is Cachaça Day, and so it's the anniversary. The legalization was September 13th, 1661. So we have this reason to celebrate. It's great. That's the good news. The bad news is that Brazilians still pay this tax centuries later.
To Portugal?
So no. Now it's an
To the
internal
government.
revenue source. Yeah,
Okay.
it's an internal revenue source. But now it's the same tax. And so every legal bottle of cachaça that you buy at the store has this fancy little tax stamp up top. And so they're still paying it. So I mean, it's a fascinating story that again really speaks to the history, the heart, the culture of Brazil, and like I said, I mean, I could present to you several bottles of cachaça, and you could taste them all and swear they were five different things. And part of it is taking advantage of the unique woods that are down here. There are some people here that prefer it be aged in oak, either American oak or French oak. There are some that, like my mother-in-law, prefers it clear and steel rested. That's the way she prefers it. And then, of course, it is the main ingredient of the caipirinha, which is the national cocktail. Caipirinha, loosely translated, means kind of like country bumpkin, country girl bumpkin, caipirinha, which is muddled lime and sugar, cachaça over ice, shaken, and typically dirty poured.
Yeah. It's sort of mojito adjacent.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't have the mint and typically not the soda water.
Okay.
But what's becoming a little bit more popular down here is a cocktail that's been around since the 1950s. It's called the Rabo de Galo,
I'm sorry, one more time.
Rabo de Galo, which is literally Cocktail, Tale of the Rooster. And
Amazing.
the story behind that is Cinzano, the makers of Cinzano Vermouth, which is now owned by Campari, I believe. They set up a factory, I believe in São Paulo, yeah, sometime in the 1950s. They set up a
Hmm.
vermouth factory, and then kind of realized that there weren't really any Brazilian cocktails that would buy up a whole bunch of vermouth.
Hmm.
And so they wanted to create something that was maybe closer to a Manhattan, closer to an old fashioned. So you have cachaça, sweet vermouth, cynar, which is a liqueur made from artichokes, um,
Oh,
and
interesting.
not local to here. And then a twist of lemon, and that's another popular local cocktail here. I mean, what's interesting to me too is that as a category in the U.S. and even in Brazil, actually, cachaça can't seem to catch a break, which I also find interesting. So,
That it hasn't had its moment yet. It hasn't.
well, in the U.S., certainly. In the
Yeah.
U.S., when I was more actively running my blog, um, I would tell distillers, I said, guys, you've got the Olympics in Brazil, you've got the
Hmm.
World Cup in Brazil. If you can't figure it out with those two opportunities in front of you, give it up, right? I mean,
Right.
you're never gonna get that again. And then down here in Brazil, what's interesting is that um, cachaça appears to be a declining category even here.
Hmm.
And I say that because uh, particularly what I noticed as under President Lula's first two terms, right? Um, when you started to see more young Brazilians enter the middle class,
Hmm.
and they had, extra money in their pocket to buy booze, uh, they didn't go for cachaça. They didn't go from like rot gut cachaça to premium cachaça.
Hmm.
They went from cachaça to Jack Daniels, right?
Okay. Hmm.
It's more aspirational to be able to say, "Oh, I'm drinking this,
An
this."
American brand or.
Right, exactly. And so that is kind of tragic to me, but it's not to the degree that I'm necessarily starving for choice when it comes to cachaça here. Even the
Hmm.
local, the local grocery store has more varieties than I could ever try.
Yeah.
And but it has been a very interesting exploration, I think, because again, it's an alcohol that has so many stories, so many different ways to make it, so many different ways to prepare it, so many different ways to present it and market it, that I just found fascinating. And even though maybe perhaps I don't have the kind of time I used to maintain the Cachaça Gora
Hmm.
blog, um, it's still a scene that I follow very closely. It's still, I always get very excited when my mother-in-law comes from her latest confraria meeting. It's like, okay, now check this one out. I think you'll like this
Hmm.
one because it has, these characteristics or whatever.
So when you, if you go out to a bar, because there
Yeah,
are, right, like in Chicago, there are whiskey bars where they'll have,
right.
or bourbon bars where they'll have 100 available.
Oh yeah.
Are there bars in Rio that have 100 bottles and you can go and be a discerning drinker, or is that more a home hobby? Like I'm curious, like what is the public
That's a good
availability of
question.
interesting
Oh,
cachaças?
absolutely. In Rio in particular, you'll find maybe half a dozen cachaças on the typical restaurant menu wherever you go,
Mhm.
of varying degrees of quality. Um, but there are places like Academia de Cachaça, where I visited, where the cachaça menu is basically a 3-inch thick binder,
Wow. Okay.
and all the walls around you have cachaça bottles,
Mm-hmm.
and and that's and that's a place where they'll serve food and cachaça and what have you. But then you go to cachaça stores, cachaça, that kind of place, and you'll see hundreds of different labels and again just walls and walls and walls of cachaça,
Yeah.
and we've we've been to places like that as well, where you're just looking at it, it's just at a certain point it's like if you're not an enthusiast, I imagine somebody would look at that and go, okay, at this point I need freedom from choice, not freedom of choice,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
um, but it is it is a category where if you kind of like the whiskey bars that you mentioned, if you know where to find them, you can have that incredibly broad, even overwhelming
Mm-hmm.
tasting experience.
So let's talk a little bit about your sabbatical when you took an apprenticeship at
Yes,
a distillery.
yes.
This is this the sabbatical is the reason I regret leaving Edelman.
But wait a minute,
Was
you
like
were, oh, right, you weren't quite
it
at
was
10 years.
announced. Oh no, I was like 4.
Oh, okay, okay, right. Man, okay,
I
man,
was a
yeah,
big
you're
personality for a small amount of time.
right. Right, right, right.
They announced, I feel like because I resigned and then I stayed on as a contractor for a while before I left. I feel like it was in that window when I was a contractor that they announced sabbaticals, and I really was like, do you really want to be a freelancer when you could have sabbaticals? But I did. I made the choices I made. But when your sabbatical came around,
Yes, at 10 years, yeah.
at 10 years, um how did you how d- I mean, at this point the blog is strong enough that you've got some relationships that you can
Oh,
call
yeah.
on to say, can I come? And had you been to any distilleries before then?
Oh, yeah, no, I had toured several. I took one tour in Parachi, which is a wonderful cachaça producing region. And then, let's see, in 2010, um, actually, my parents joined me on a trip. And so it was my parents and Leticia's parents. And um, our daughter was, maybe not quite a year old at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And we went on a distillery tour because, of course, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, they knew everybody from the
Right.
Confraria, and we went to this one place in Rio das Flores, which is on the border of Rio de Janeiro and the adjoining state, Minas Gerais, and um, there was a wonderful couple that ran the place. And it was a place called Wernick Cachaça, and Eli Wernick was at one time the CEO of Volvo Penta Brazil. So that is Volvo's boat motor division, right?
Oh, of course.
In Brazil. And so when he retired, he didn't want to sit idle, so he learned distilling methods. And obviously, as a man of international business, he knew English, which was certainly better
Mm-hmm.
than my Portuguese. And I just really fell in love with his operation there, and he and his wife and I really got along. And the the sabbatical comes up, and I broached the idea to Claudia, my mother-in-law, and I emailed Ili somewhat plaintively, and I was like, look, I said, I want to learn distilling. I'll work for you for free. I'll sleep
Mm-hmm.
on the floor if I have to. Just make sure that I'm not taking a job away from somebody
Right.
who could use it, right?
Yeah.
It's not worth that to satisfy my weird little yuppie fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes, you know, I'm all for it. He goes, pick whatever 2 weeks, and we'll just go ahead and do it. And he warned me. He goes, well, I warn you, there's not much luxury up here. And I said, okay, that's fine, fine by
Right.
me. I was prepared to sleep on the floor. He had a bedroom for me and everything. And so I was there for 2 weeks. The work week there was Tuesday through Saturday, and um, the first week, he was, I think he was just kind of feeling me out, making sure
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to cause a costly enterprise
Yeah.
destroying yield crash. And we did one distillation a day, and he was showing me, okay, this is how you cut the cane, evaluate the cane. And so he had like this spectrometer where he's analyzing the sugar content of the cane. And
Wow.
then we crush it, and it goes down a sluice that kind of goes over the main road of the property. So everything's gravity fed, no
Mm-hmm.
pumps or anything. And it goes right into the still house. And then we dilute it to a normalized sugar content. We add warm water to heat it up to a point where the yeasts can be activated. And once it reaches that point, it goes into the fermentation tanks, and they hang out there for 24 to 48 hours. And then it moves to distillation. And the distillation was wood fired, and that is to say wood from logs, but also the dried sugarcane, call it the bagasso, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the dried sugarcane remains after you crush the hell out of it. And, for that first week, it was, a lot of high school math, right?
Yep.
To make sure that you've got the
Yeah.
proportions right. And then we did one distillation a day, and then come back to Rio. He picks me up the next Tuesday, and then we rack it up to two distillations a day.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much the day started around 6 a.m. and typically didn't end until 11 or 11:30 at night.
Wow.
And I had a blast. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm a senior vice president at the world's largest PR firm, and I don't think I worked this hard at my job. And here I
Mm-hmm.
am, here I am at this at this distillery, very, very far from Rio's city center, hours away.
Yeah.
And I just had an absolute blast. And I remember vividly the last dinner we had together. It got really emotional because by that second week, we had figured out a shorthand, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just an absolutely incredible experience. And it turned out to be incredibly well timed because the week before, he had found a distributor in Southern California who had ordered 1,600 bottles,
Wow.
and he was kind of waiting for the check to clear or something. There's something business related, and he says,
Yeah.
"Look," he says, "I know you're here to learn distilling, et cetera, et cetera." He goes, "But if this deal comes through, we're going to be doing standardization all day long, where it's like we take the distillate, we add the amount of distilled water, we standardize it to 40% alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
bottle it, label it." And he goes, "That's going to be the 2 weeks because 1,600
Yeah.
bottles have to move." And fortunately, whatever paperwork needed to clear didn't clear that week.
Right.
And so I was there for, again, 2 weeks, just having just the time of my life. And and I was also sort of amusing myself with kind of inside jokes for whatever. So I would go up to him, and I'd say, "Eli, we need to cook. I was dropping Breaking Bad references all over the
Right.
place, knowing he was not going to get them. But that's what it felt like. I mean, the uniform that you have to wear to
Yeah.
maintain hygiene in the fermentation area. I mean, you look like the guys in the bunny suits from the old Intel ads, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with my beard and everything, I had to do an
A
extra
lot of
careful
hair,
job.
extra hair nuts.
Yeah, exactly. And but man, yeah, we just had a blast, and we ended up making about 750 liters those 2 weeks, which when you standardize them would be close to about 1,200 bottles.
All right.
We that was a little better, back then in terms of doing it by the numbers, but it was highly, highly productive. We would joke that the result was Reserva Gringo, the Gringo's Reserve. So I always joke that if you see Verna Cachaça on the grocery store shelf, there's like a molecule or two of Reserva Gringo in there floating somewhere, right?
Yep.
Um, you know, leaving
So
my trace, as it were.
after it's distilled,
Mhm.
you mentioned your mother-in-law prefers it when it's been rested in like a stainless steel container. So then
Yes,
does it, or I guess there's not rules about where it goes after it's distilled. There's like culture about so after it's distilled, it is then put into a barrel to
you
absorb the
could.
wood flavors or,
You could. You could get it straight out of the still, uh,
okay.
um,
That seems like it would put
which,
hair on your chest and also burn it off.
well, I mean, there are two different ways to make cachaça, right? Artisanally and industrially.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do it artisanally, what you have to be careful of is the separation of what they call the head, the heart, the tail.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're distilling, the lighter alcohols get evaporated first. And those
Mm-hmm.
are things like methanol and that sort of thing that will cause blindness, liver damage, et cetera, et cetera. You want to get rid of that, right?
Yeah.
And then you have what's known as the heart. That's where you get your ethanol. And at the end is the tail where you get your heavier alcohols, the
Okay.
aldehydes and that sort of thing. So, and if you really know what you're doing, when you taste the heart, coming right out of the still, I described it as God's blueprint for sugarcane, just distilled into like liquid form, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just really incredible, really bright, really crisp flavors. But after that, there are many different ways you can go. You can rest it in stainless steel, which will mellow it out, but still give you that very bright kind of flavor.
Mm-hmm.
You can rest it in oak, which will give you a very familiar whiskey flavor, the more vanilla-y kind of flavor. And then you've got other woods like Ipe, Mendoline, um, various others that will mellow it out, but impart minimal color and minimal flavor, right?
Okay.
And those are the ones that I tend to prefer, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've noticed lately, that the trend down here has been to age the distillate in multiple woods, where it'll
Okay.
spend some time in oak, it'll spend some time in Jequitiba, which is probably my favorite wood, um, Ipe, so on and so forth. And there's one by Weberhaus, which is aged in 7 woods, right? It just goes sequentially one after another. And
Wow.
and and I'll tell you, it's more than a gimmick. I mean, it is really
It's
amazing,
changing the flavor. Yeah.
right? And then I have one cachaça in my collection. It's actually still in storage in Chicago. I've got one cachaça in my collection that was aged in a stone pit lined in paraffin wax. So the guy dug a hole in the ground and he
Okay.
lined the pit with river rock, and then he
Filled the
filled in the
gaps
nooks,
with.
yeah, filled the gaps with paraffin wax, and then he aged the cachaça in there. And the story I heard was that there were um, that the feds came in and said, "Well, you can't do that." And so apparently, I have one of the last bottles of this,
Okay.
which I've kept. And actually, I do have in my collection. At one point, it got up to like 120 bottles.
Oh my gosh.
Um, but I've had ones that aren't made anymore, really good ones, but for whatever reason, maybe the next generation of the family didn't want to continue
Mm-hmm.
the business, so maybe that stops. I have one. This is a really interesting story. I told you about the tax stamp earlier, right?
Right.
There was this one brand that was, of course, I've heard this story, secondhand, third hand, but it's too amazing not
Sure.
to tell. There was this distillery that was the only major distillery in this particular area that they were operating legally. They put on their tax stamps and everything, and there were a number of sort of wildcat or just sort of bootleg operations just
Mm-hmm.
in and around the town. And one day the feds come in and shut down all of the illegally operating distilleries, leaving only this one. And then the rumor started going around that it was the legal distillery that tipped off the feds.
Mm.
and so there was a boycott.
Yep.
And then now that distillery is out of business. And so I have one of the few bottles of that in my
Oh my
collection.
gosh.
Um, but yeah, it's just one amazing story after another in this particular category, which is what's made that exploration so rewarding. One of the things that I do when I entertain is, the caipirinha is, in my mind, the perfect cocktail. Not just a good
Mm-hmm.
cocktail, it's the perfect cocktail. And
Okay.
I say it's perfect because you only have three things: sweetener, typically sugar,
Mm-hmm.
fruit, typically lime,
Mm-hmm.
and then booze, cachaça, right? So rotate any one of those, and you can instantly create your own cocktail. Just
Okay.
boom, right off the bat. And so one of the things that I started doing a long time ago was I would say, okay, sweetener. You can make a simple syrup, equal parts sugar and water, right?
Yep.
Typical bar staple. But the water you can maybe infuse with tea. You can make a tea out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and then add the sugar later. And so one caipirinha I make is with a chai syrup that I make.
Ooh, all right.
So I boil a ton of chai tea. I add an equal amount of sugar. I let that cool. And then you take that, the lime cachaça, and now you have a chai caipirinha. One that has been, I'm surprised how much people like this one, is a sriracha caipirinha. I call it the bad rooster. And and too bad, yeah. There's a sriracha shortage, but um, you take 2 cups of water, 2 cups of sugar, and a tablespoon of sriracha, not that much,
Okay.
and then you take that lime cachaça, and it's a hit. It's a hit.
Yeah.
I've had
Have a little
I've
bit of heat.
yeah I've had people, and it's this very pleasant sort of yellowish orange color.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people, come to my house, and no matter what I'm serving, I've had people go, do you have
Mm-hmm.
any of the bad rooster? And it's like, okay, I'll make you a one-off, right? But for
Yeah.
some reason, people love that one. Um, I've tried a green tea one, which was good, not great. Um, the availability of fresh fruits down here
I can't even. It's
completely
yeah,
changes how you make cocktails. Completely changes.
right.
Um, Maracuja, which is passion fruit. It's called
Mm-hmm.
maracuja down here. It's my absolute favorite caipirinha. Absolute favorite. And one of the reasons is that um, passion fruit resists cultivation in the US for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to have a cocktail with fresh passion fruit, you're probably talking about a $25 cocktail
Okay.
because that head of passion fruit is $5.
Right.
Now, for $5, I can have a pickup truck full of full of
Right.
passion fruit, just dump it in front of my apartment
Yeah.
door. But and so the passion fruit caipirinha. I remember, on that same visit where my parents came down here, we're at a party, and I ordered a passion fruit caipirinha, and I'm walking back to my parents, and I've got this shit-eating grin, and my dad's looking at me, going, "What's wrong?" I go, "This is a $25 cocktail anywhere else. I'm living like P Diddy right now." You know? But cashew fruit is another great ingredient for cocktails here. I'm
Like
sure it has.
the like, because a cashew that we eat, like the seed we eat, is kind of
Yeah,
in like a big softball sort of sized, like an
fruit. Yeah,
Osage orange almost, right?
yeah. It sits at the top of this fruit, and
Oh.
it that also has great flavors, and it's really funny too because here I have access to all these wonderful
Oh.
fruit flavors, and the only thing I know how to do with them is make them completely unhealthy by putting booze in it. Uh, but it's that's another one. That's another favorite.
The cashew
Um,
apple. They
yeah,
look like they look like they're out of Strawberry Shortcake or the Smurfs.
yeah,
They look
kind of. Yeah, 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 yeah,
right.
yeah.
How
But
funny.
yeah,
Okay.
that's the yeah, and so it's just again these amazing experiences that one can make with this spirit, and it also speaks to what kind of innovation you can have when the rules are very firm but very few,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, so it's like it's in Brazil, great. It's between 38 and 48 ABV, great. It's fresh sugar cane juice, great. And then of course there's you know the sop to the industrial producers, the 6 grams
Yep.
per liter. But again, very few, very simple, very strict rules, and within that, you can have again all of this innovation, all of this variety,
Mm-hmm.
while still remaining true to the category. And that's what also fascinates me, just philosophically, about cachaça.
Yeah. So for my American audience, which is most of my audience,
Right?
if they were going to go and buy a bottle to share at their next party, because parties
Uh-huh.
are back, or if
Oh yes,
somebody
they
was
are.
going to like look for, how does somebody start their cachaça journey after listening to this podcast?
Wow. All right. So I'm either gonna make or lose a lot of friends here. Well, okay. When I think about one of the reasons why cachaça is not very popular in the U.S. is that when it first arrived, what you had were cachaças that were industrially made, not particularly good, still set you back $20, right? So you go to the Benny's Beverage Depot or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
You buy the bottle. You say, "Hey, wow, cachaça, Brazil, Rio,
Yeah.
Copacabana Beach, bikinis. Wait, whatever." And then you make a bunch of drinks with it, and you are hating life the next day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they go, "Well, shit, I don't want to do that again." And
Right.
so here comes a good cachaça, and they want to charge you $25, and you're going, "No, you've
Right.
already been soured to the category." So, um, unfortunately, a lot of the industrial brands are the ones that sort of make it to the States. The ones that are both good and pretty widely available. Leblon, I always tell people, you can't go wrong.
Okay.
So that was started by a gentleman named Steve Lutman, who took a minority, who Bacardi took a minority stake in this business, and then at one point just sort of bought the parts they didn't already own. And that one is not only excellent, not only reasonably priced, but it's aged in French cognac casks for, I think,
Okay.
6 months. Um, I think for a while, I think the Cachaça was going to France and back, and then I think somebody raised their hand and said, "Well, why don't we just move the barrels to Brazil?"
Yeah.
So there's that one. I'm a really big fan of Novo Fogo, which is it's all organic. The bottles are even made from recycled glass.
Nice.
It's a very sustainable operation. Um, the waste product from the cachaça distillation goes to like power the vehicles on the farm. It's imported by a wonderful gentleman named Dragos, who I believe lives in Seattle. Um, and it's a little harder to find, but it's rewarding when you do. And in fact, I think that one of his aged products is actually aged in used bourbon barrels, which turns out to be a big deal because
Yeah.
the legal definition of bourbon is, well, it has to be a toasted, brand new American oak
Right.
barrel. Well, the thing can only be brand new once.
Right.
So once it's no longer brand new, who could use it? Cachaça distillers.
Perfect.
So those two tend to be, you'll have to look a little harder for Novo Fogo, but Leblon is very available and you cannot go wrong. I think it's excellent.
Can you spell the Novo
Oh,
Fro?
Novo Fogo, Novo,
Okay.
new word, Fogo.
Novo
Uh,
Fogo. Okay.
yeah. Now, I would of course recommend as the best of all of them, Vernick Cachaça, but
Yep.
you can't get it. It, it's all mine. You can't have it.
Okay.
But they offer steel rested, Jequitibal rested, oak rested, and one that is Jequitibal and oak rested.
All
And
right.
but
Do they not
Neener
export?
Neener.
They don't export out of Brazil, or like there's no chance of finding it in Illinois.
You're probably not going to find it in the U.S.
Okay.
He did try. I mentioned earlier he found that distributor in Southern
Right.
California who the bottles made it and the warehouse took delivery and the distributor went out of business.
Oh no.
And so Eli emails me and he goes, I don't know what to do. He goes, I have no financial interest in this whatsoever, but if you could help me find a good home for these 1,600 bottles, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And I was knocking around on this, and I remember I emailed the guy the next day, and the guy goes, well, to take it off my hands, there's this lien on it, there's the back rent in the warehouse, et cetera, et cetera. And so not my former boss's problem, it's
Right.
somebody's problem, but I figured if there was an easy way to do it. And then one day I was in a somewhat altered state with my in-laws, and I was recounting the story, and I looked at my watch and I go, "There's a 5-hour time difference between here and California. I wonder." So I called the guy at the warehouse. I found his number.
Yeah.
So here I am again. I'm in a somewhat altered state, and this guy probably doesn't even know what the hell happened to him. But yeah, 4 years later, it was still sitting there.
Oh my gosh.
As of what, 3, 4 years ago, it was the last time I checked up on this. Um, There were 1,600 bottles of absolutely positively like internationally award-winning cachaça just sitting in this dude's warehouse, and
Oh,
he had no idea what to do with it. He was like, I don't know, is it going to go to auction? Do I sell it for a
right.
buck a bottle? I don't know. I couldn't take it off his hands because, of course, transporting liquor across state lines is
Yeah.
complicated, to say nothing of the three-tier distribution mechanism in
Yep.
Chicago. I don't know where I would put it. Uh, but the guy was sitting on 1,600 bottles.
Wow. Just resting, just letting it rest in glass bottles to
Yeah,
finish it.
yeah, exactly. But who knows
That's
where that happened?
wild.
I might be inspired to call him tomorrow
Right.
and see if it's still there.
And be like, how much do you care about the back rent and the lien versus just getting the space back, dude?
Just getting the space. Yeah, exactly.
Right? That is wild.
So yeah, I would recommend Vernick above all of those,
Okay.
but we tried.
Well, maybe somebody listening is in supply chain management or alcohol
Or alcohol
and
purchases. Yeah.
yeah, can do something interesting. Is there anything else about cachaça that I have not asked
Yes.
you that I would be remiss in if we left without you saying? You would be remiss.
Oh man. I don't know. This has been a pretty thorough rapid fire review.
Yeah.
I would just encourage people uh, to give it a try. You'll be surprised how often it's behind the bar. Um, at the very least, try the caipirinha. Um, most bartenders will know how to make it. Although
Yeah.
um, there was this one time in Chicago, actually at the Roosevelt Collection.
Hmm.
It was when Avatar came out,
The first one?
the first one.
Okay.
So that puts it at what, 2009, 2010?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, the Roosevelt Collection has an icon theater, which, if you have a VIP pass, you have access to better food and a full bar. And I noticed that he had LeBlanc Cachaça behind the bar, and I said, "Hey, can you make a caipirinha?" The guy said, "Sure." And what he poured was, there was this sugary sludge at the bottom,
Hmm.
slices of lime that he didn't bother to muddle, maybe one ice cube, and I, probably about 4 ounces of booze. I mean,
Ooh.
he really, really
He was
laid
like,
it
I
on.
don't want this bottle anymore.
Right. And so I take it and I sit down and I'm watching Avatar and I'm going, either these are the most awesome special effects I've ever seen, or this cocktail's really strong. And then I
Yeah.
sit there going, both can be true,
Yes.
and both
Yeah.
are true.
Yeah. I will also say that the bar at the Roosevelt Collection tends to lean sweeter cocktails.
They do. They
They
do, right? Yeah.
they're bright colors, they're very sweet. That's something I've noticed there when I get drinks. I'm like, you got to be ready for like a fun sugary cocktail.
Yeah. And glucose shock, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Yes.
right.
Well, Phil, this has been wonderful.
Yes,
Thank you so much
yes.
for coming on Finding Favorites.
My pleasure.
Where can people find you on the internet?
Let's see, I am at philgomes.com. You can also find me at Phil Gomes on Twitter. It's probably the other place. And when I get around to resurrecting Cachaça Gorda, and it has been a few years now, you can find me at Cachaça Gorda on Twitter and Instagram and cachacagorda.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.